We're all here today. You know, 13 years ago, we didn't really have a long-range plan. We certainly didn't have 13 years in mind. And we began by just, what should be our theme for tonight? Let's discuss this. And then a few weeks later, let's have another theme. And in our journey over 13 years, we have come to mature in the sense that we understood what might be really good is to have a theme. So I believe about 5 years ago, we began, I think our first theme was the beloved community and wanting to grow in an understanding of that. Last year, you probably remember, we did Care for the Earth, based our work on Laudate Si, the encyclical of our common home, care for our common home. So if I asked you right now, we won't have a show of hands, but what is our theme for this year? Do you know what we're working with? Well, if not, let me provide you with an answer for that one. It is the culture of encounter, the culture or the art of encounter. And each of the women that we have, the team of 6 people, by the way, have chosen, have been women who have encultured the other in some very special way, in very unique way. So the second part of our theme, which is the art or the culture of encounter, is midwives of change. And each of the women, the 2 women we have heard, we'll hear Alison today, and our 2 forward speakers are all midwives, ushering, bringing forth change, a new vision for us. So our invitation to these speakers has not just to be entertained and awed by their faith journey, but to see in some way how their lives have been transformed and how what they share with us might incite in us ways of entering into encounters with the other in our own lives. We came up with the idea of encounter partly because of the pandemic, and we were not encountering everyone, in person. And also because of our awareness of the fragmentation of the world we live in. Coincidentally, Pope Francis, in February 4th, 2020, produced Fratelli Tutti, which was his 3rd encyclical. And he too realized that because of the pandemic and also the social fragmentation and the division around ideological lines, that he says, I want to offer this encyclical as a modest contribution. He says, may we prove capable of responding with a new vision. He says of fraternity, we'll say sorority also. And social friendship that moves beyond the level of words. So he's calling us to this culture or art of encounter, one of social friendship. The idea of dialogue and friendship in society is what really the culture of encounter is about. And it becomes an art of encounter. And he, in Fratelli Tutti, he says, it is an encounter even with people on the peripheries of society, even more so. He mentions particularly the original peoples, and he says, quote, because each of us can learn something from others. He goes on to say the miracle of kindness, he says, is a star. Kindness is a star shining in the midst of darkness. And he says, kindness frees us from cruelty, from anxiety, from frantic flurry of activity that mark our present society. And the art of encounter, the culture of encounter then calls an alternative way of thinking and a way of being and a way of doing. So I think as women in conversation, we are called to, deeply, because we feel like this choice was a discernment of the spirit, and that this art of encounter is a charge maybe that we have. The women that have spoken, Anne Simmons Booker was definitely a midwife of change. She presented us with the work that connects. She's a Franciscan, a Catholic worker, started the Canticle Farm, gave us tools using Joanna Macy's, the idea of transforming darkness into some kind of hope. And Anita Wells too, a woman who has spent years doing genealogy, reaching back before the American Revolution to show within her own history, she carries Indigenous and white and Black histories within herself and reconciling that. And today, Anita Benders comes to us, and Susan Grant is going to open the curtains for Alison. But she too is a midwife for change in her work, her way of living, her personal life. So I suggest that each of us listen deeply to the fact that we are called to the art of encounter, whether it's in a store or in our personal lives or in the streets with people. What is the art of encounter and how are we changed? Because the idea is transformation. The idea is that we are changed and networked with new people. So with that, I am very excited that I have to say that Alison is going to be speaking today, in part because February is the month that the Catholic Church embraces Black Catholicism. So I think it's really appropriate. The Spirit had some moving here, having her line up as our January speaker. So thank you very much. Remember our theme, the culture of encounter, the art of encounter, and we are charged to be midwives, to be changed, and to change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jean. With that in mind, Therese, would you like to begin with our opening prayer?
I'm reminded that Joan Chittister says to us, there are no gifts as precious as the gifts of time and listening. So I ask us to put ourselves into those quiet moments as we pray together. Almighty Creator, as we come together today, hungering for justice in our very polarized world, give us the spirit of quiet so that we may listen and bring our hearts to a compassion for all. We ask this through Jesus and in the name of justice and peace. Amen.
Thank you, Therese. Susan, I'd like to introduce Susan Grant, who will introduce Alison this morning.
Can you hear me okay?
It's a little weak, Susan.
Okay. I've had this trouble before. Tell me about that. How is that?
Much better.
Okay. Dr. Alison Benders is Vice President for Mission and Ministry at Santa Clara University. Prior to this role, she served for 7 years in such roles as Senior Lecturer, Associate Dean, and Interim Dean of the Jesuit School of Theology, where her teaching and writing focused on racial justice and reconciliation. Earlier, she had worked in senior roles in universities in Ohio, and before her work in academia, she was a practicing litigation attorney in Philadelphia. Dr. Benders holds a bachelor's degree from Yale University, a JD from the University of Virginia, a licentiate of sacred theology from JST, and a PhD in theology from Boston College. She and Larry, her African-American husband of over 40 years, have 4 children and 4 grandchildren. They live and work in the Bay Area and in Cleveland, Ohio. In the last few years, our nation has been appearing to be coming to some sort of day of reckoning on race. And when someone talks about a day of reckoning, they mean a day or time in the future when people will be forced to deal with something unpleasant that they've been avoiding until now. So in response to the tumultuous events leading up to the election of 2020, Alison originally planned a civil rights journey to be undertaken in the fall of that year. But as we all know, the pandemic interrupted, She did travel, but the travel was from her desk, using her own prior journals and memories and experiences, along with the insights of scholars and activists. The resulting book that she is going to be talking to us about is not just a book, it's a guide to a pilgrimage, a summons to walk with the author and the Holy Spirit. As she points out, a pilgrimage is not just a history tour. Transformation is the hallmark of pilgrimage. And from time immemorial, we humans have looked for wisdom and transformation. As I read her book, Alison's writing reminded me that I could join her on her pilgrimage. It reminded me of times when I could have spoken out strongly against a racist remark or perspective, but I didn't, or I did so tepidly. So I've been revisiting those situations in my mind and changing my responses. So next time I'll be ready. Alison also reminds us that Jesus frequently ended parables by saying, let those who have eyes see, let those who have ears hear. Today we have our own guide to remind us to use our eyes and ears as we look at racism in our country. So let's welcome Alison Benders.
Oh, gosh, thank you for that lovely introduction. And I'm so gratified because you make me sound better than I am, or more insightful than I am. So thank you so much. And Jean, thank you for inviting me, and for all of you here this morning, you wonderful women in conversation. It is the heart of Encounter, is to have conversation. And I'm also thinking that this morning is pretty timely because on Monday we celebrate the legacy of Martin Luther King, and we'll have some remarks about MLK as well. So when I'm talking this morning, I'm talking about, as you know, through my own experience, but also my experience as it intersects with moments in our history. I talk about anti-Black racism, although there are lots of other kinds of oppressions, but this is my experience and the one that I feel like I can witness to and invite you into. And then we all have our share of experiences, our own kinds of expertise and reflections. And I know you'll bring those into the conversation. So let me share my screen and tell you how we'll proceed today. Okay, and do this. So does that work for all of you, right? So good. So this is the cover of my book, and it's an image by a Dutch painter called The Fruit Picker. And the book itself is called Original Sin, A Pilgrimage of Race and Grace. And I'm just going to use it not to talk about the book, but actually perhaps to use moments and experiences from it to guide us. Let's see. I'm trying to advance. Here we go. Sorry about that. So I want to think about, as Jean talked to us about the art of encounter, and I also pulled up a quote from Fratelli Tutti, and the encyclical uses the Good Samaritan, that story, as an invitation for us to ask, who is our neighbor? And so let me quote from Pope Francis. The parable shows us how a community can be rebuilt by men and women who identify with the vulnerability of others, who reject the creation of a society of exclusion and instead act as neighbors, lifting up and rehabilitating the fallen for the sake of the common good. So when I think about this parable, it invites us to transform our understanding of who's our neighbor. And then we can only do that through encounter. And what I would say most importantly, that encounter, and Jean was saying this as well, right? Encounter leads to transformation and conversion. So in the course of this, my remarks today, I'm going to talk about 3 different kinds of conversion. Conversion of our vision or our hearing. Those who have eyes see, those who have ears hear, and that leads to a conversion of our hearts, our empathy, our understanding. And then third, this leads to actions, converted actions. And so the discussion questions at the end will track these 3 moments that I'll use in terms of conversions building upon one another. And my conviction is that when we truly meet one another, that we become new people. And that certainly has been the case for me. So, and what I'll also do is, again, I'll also show photos and read short passages from the book that I wrote as a way, because I think I said it better than I can say it again. So that's a way to invite you into reflection. So this image is what I started out with. And I was moved by John Lewis, the great civil rights hero. And he used the African proverb, when you pray, move your feet. And that's exactly what a pilgrimage is. It's praying and moving, encountering, praying, listening, and we're transformed by this. I also then had a prayer that I prayed every day for myself. And it was called, you're familiar with it, the Shema, which is from ancient Israel, but Jesus quotes it. And this is an image from the St. John's Illuminated Bible. And the Shema is, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength." And Shema, the call to hear, is not just to hear, but it also implies a response. Listen and act. So that's what I held in my heart. The other image, the other item in this image you'll see is a shillelagh, which is an Irish walking stick. And I use that to remind me of my own path, to remind me that I was on pilgrimage. And it's wrapped, I wrapped it with a ribbon and with a rosary as objects to hold my attention in prayer and to help me pay attention. But let me also tell you why anti-Black racism, and you heard a little bit about my background. So my husband is African-American, and we met in college. And that was the beginning for me of an encounter. And through his life experiences, through our shared experiences, through our children's experiences, I have become a new person with deeper understanding about how anti-Black racism, but all sorts of oppressions operate in so many invisible ways in our culture. So we've lived in 6 different states across the country and met scores of people. And in many, many instances, that's been wonderful. But there are other instances there are other times to share that life has been quite difficult. But all of us have those experiences. So I'll share some moments in various ways to invite you in. So let's get started on our steps of conversion. So converting our vision means seeing racial injustice more clearly in our past and in the present culture. And we're often not attentive to what's going on because we're so familiar. So I want you to look at the picture at the top. And the top picture is an image of the French Quarter in New Orleans, where we went on a class trip. It's pretty familiar. And you'll note the wrought iron balconies there. And as I reflected and learned, West African blacksmiths, either free or enslaved, had forged iron into ornate scrolls with webs of filigree and complicated flourishes. Blacksmiths had their signature motifs, acorns or oak leaves. The historians read dramas into the balconies, but some designs were very subtle. They proclaimed resistance to white-dominated society, with meanings hidden in the artisans' tribal symbols. But the historical markers rarely acknowledged the enslaved craftsmen whose pounding labor created the city's unparalleled grandeur. I also remembered, as I resumed my sauntering through New Orleans, that blacksmithing skills produce shackles and leg irons, as well as delicate filigree. And then we see that same point here in this metalwork. This is an image from a museum in Maryland, and I'm sorry, I've forgotten the name. I had to go search for it. But here we see silver and those delicate, expensive items compared and in the same image with leg shackles. So I wonder what happens if we see wrought iron also as a legacy of slavery in New Orleans, as silver, as wealth that was produced by stolen labor. These things are right in front of our eyes, and we very rarely see them. This is a call to convert our vision. So let me read just another piece about converting our vision, a little more personal. In encountering the tales of the auction blocks in New Orleans, I heard a phrase that made me shudder. At that time, just as now, women and Black people had been subjugated, considered suitable to be dominated and used as white men's property. The New Orleans slaveholding society perceived Black women's bodies in particular as property for white men's sexual satisfaction. Attractive Negro women of fair complexion were in demand as concubines and prostitutes in the New Orleans brothels. White men bought and sold the women as fancy girls. The phrase struck a nerve, pointing to a connection that I'd hardly dared to acknowledge. Fancy girls was the nickname our daughters gave themselves when they played dress up years ago. Mom, you're so lucky to have us. You're fancy girls. Now, had we lived 200 years ago in New Orleans, our daughters of mixed descent would most likely have faced a life of satisfying white men's sexual desires simply because of their African heritage. They might have been fancy girls. So you can imagine those kinds of connections have opened my eyes. But let's move to something that I think more of us who are familiar with Berkeley. I want to talk about this image that I took from UC Berkeley's institute, the Berkeley Institute on Othering. And you'll probably recognize it, right? I don't know if you can see my cursor. This is Berkeley and Oakland. This is UC Berkeley. Each dot here represents an individual. Blue dots are individuals who are white. Green dots are individuals who are Black. Red dots, people who identify as Asian, and yellow dots here, people who are Hispanic. This is from 2010. The legacy, there's lots of research, and I'm not going to go into that all now, but zoning and deed restrictions and the location of institutions all had racial undertones and racial intent to segregate the races, to keep whites separate and wealthy, and to keep African Americans and other minority groups exploited and marginalized. And you can see that even after, we would say 50 years after the civil rights movement, this is what Berkeley looks like, and Oakland. And you can see, and we know that the wealthier homes are often up the hill, more crowded down near the waterfront. So this is, for me, just really an invitation to us to look around us and watch for the legacy that permeates every aspect of our lives. And every city has demographics and a census tracts that look just like this. So let me give one more example of our inability to notice things. And this is really quite personal, but it's I found it's very powerful. So sometimes it's hard for me to read this, but I will. So in America, we look to people's skin color to know where to place them in the hierarchy of caste and virtue. I remember my 3-year-old daughter's first lesson on the importance of color. Her father went to pick her up one day from nursery school. His skin and features had always been labeled black, while hers were more ambiguous, with her light skin, tan skin, blonde hair, and blue eyes. That afternoon, she stood behind her teacher in the classroom doorway, clamoring for notice. "My dad is here. He's right there." Even though her father was the only parent in the lobby wearing his suit and tie from the office, the teacher wouldn't release his own daughter into his care. "There's no one there, honey," the teacher reprimanded our tearful child. In America, in past and present, to be Black has meant to be invisible, and it has meant that people don't count. So let's wrap up this section about converting our vision. Oops, I apologize for that. Now I've got to figure out how to get this back down. Let me just move this back one. So this is a litany of conversion that I created to be both inspirational and also to be practical. So let our vision be sharp. We shall study the research on guns and poverty, environmental harms, and migration. We shall probe the relationship between violence and oppression and their roots in white domination. We shall see the legacy of our divisions in our own communities right here. And we shall diagnose the problems of our nation with honesty and courage. And the inspiration, let all our inquiries, in all these, let us see as prophets see, measuring what is against what ought to be. And then down below, you'll see the question, and that's on your handout. So we'll come to that in a bit. So now we're going to talk about converting our hearts. So once we've seen and we practice seeing, we practice encounter, we practice asking and noticing and putting the pictures together, we still need to convert our hearts, our consciences. So to convert our hearts means, as I say here, forming our consciences to seek what's right. So the pictures here are from Birmingham, a trip to Birmingham, the same one that I took with a class. And they regard the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in September 1963, so 60 years ago. The top photo is of the shattered lead glass windows in the church. So let me read just briefly my impressions as I met those. So I saw these windows at the Civil Rights Museum close by. The displays preserved a few squares of twisted lead surrounding gaping voids. Ornately scrolled side panels set off the broken center panes of dawn pink or coffee tan glass. On one gray metal table, I saw a quilt-like translucent square. Its central motif was a milky orb, and it was squared off and reframed in slate blue and olive green glass. Underneath the window, a honeyed wood panel interpreted the meaning of the church bombings in gold script. Then shall he answer them, saying, verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye did it not to one of the least of these, ye did it not to me. This is from Matthew. And it's an inverse. What you do it to me, what you do to the least. But if you don't do it for the least, you neither do it for Jesus Christ. So it matters It matters how we treat each other. It matters how we encounter them, the listening, the graciousness, the kindness. That is how we treat one another, and that is how we welcome Jesus as our brother. So then let me go to the picture in the bottom. These are the 4 little girls who died in the Birmingham bombing at the 16th Street Baptist Church. They were getting ready for morning celebration. So let me read a little bit quickly about that. My breathing slowed when I finally reached the far end of the park and stopped to study the butterfly etched memorials to the 16th Street Baptist Church girls. Addie Mae Collins, Carol Denise McNair, Carol Robertson, and Cynthia Wesley died just as they were poised on the edge of life. They were daughters, sisters, and friends. Had they lived, I thought to myself, they would be cherishing their grandchildren, just like I am, and their grandchildren would be enjoying the freedoms that they had purchased with their blood. They carried on their youthful shoulders the community's hope in those days their hope that in those days a change is going to come. And a change is going to come is from Sam Cooke's recording. And in those days in the early 60s, there was this tremendous hope that a change would come. And again, this is the encounter for us, the hope in the civil rights movement, the hope of people that we see around us, now the George Floyd community around his death, his murder, all of those experiences invite us into the hope that people have for their lives. So how do we cultivate feeling? So moving from trying to draw you in to then invite you to practices, and these aren't new, right? The practices of empathy. What we need to do is to empathize so that we begin to feel the urgency that leads to converting our actions. So these things, of course, we know, and Jean touched on them, right? To listen actively, withhold judgment, to be understanding, to show empathy in gestures like this, touch, right? To practice presence. There's nothing else that we have before us but to listen and be present in kindness, and to ask questions openly, not presuming, not judgmentally, but openly. And these are things that we know. So let me now go back to inviting you in to encounter. And I am showing you images, and I'm reflecting from this pilgrimage, but I was with students, with another colleague, and these conversations are ones that I've had over time. So the encounter is not just at that time and place, but a continuing examination of an event. So this is the stained glass window at the back of the 16th Street Baptist Church. And this has been a touchstone for me, this image of Jesus Christ. The people of Wales sent this stained glass window to Birmingham, Alabama, to an African-American church. They commissioned it to replace the rose window that had been destroyed in the bombing. And at the bottom, I'm not sure how much you can read it clearly, in the glass, it says, "You do it to me." So let me just read again a reflection about this. At last, I turned my eyes to the sanctuary's treasure, the leaded glass window at the back of the church. I knew what image to expect, but my expectations were completely inadequate. From the balcony heights, the blue-white window of a crucified Christ blessed and challenged every person who entered here. I felt embraced by Christ in that moment. Worked in spare detail, his brown-skinned body hung from the cross, back and shoulders rounded, with his head fallen forward, sinking to his chest. A halo of light emanated into the world from his heart. He bowed his head and gave up his spirit, John tells us. Sorry. In Christ's loving arms, I recognize God's cosmos embracing love, breathed out, washing over the world and baptizing it again, always new. As at the genesis of creation, God's breath was stirring the earth's chaotic darkness once more into hopeful promise. I recognize love lifted up on the cross, balanced on the horizon between heaven and earth, filling all things with life. I recognize the inscription's truth. You do it to me. And I recognized in that inscription what we do to the people who are other than us, what the people we do to the African Americans in our history, to marginalized groups. You do it to me. And this is the empathy, the encounter, but also for me, the hope, the promise that God is with us, that Jesus Christ is with us in our suffering. So I have this image on my refrigerator always to remind me of Christ is present, particularly and precisely in the people we have overlooked and set aside. It's also a sign of hope and forgiveness for me. So back to our litany of conversion. Let's talk about converting our hearts. So let our hearts be broken. We shall recite the names of people who have suffered or died from racial violence or any form of unjust exploitation. We shall comfort sorrowing communities and sorrowing people, and we shall accompany those who fear for their futures. In all our encounters, let our compassion be generous and without reserve. All right. So the third step of conversion is converting our actions. What does this mean? And it means taking concrete steps within our power and in our own places. We need to take steps, small and large, towards reconciliation and healing. So these pictures are from Selma, Alabama, and they're monuments commemorating Bloody Sunday, the Bloody Sunday March on March 7th, 1965. The top picture is from the Brown Chapel AME Church, which was the gathering place just a few blocks from the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And it was known as the face of the civil rights movement because that's where the leaders began. That's where they gathered. So we all know the images of the Edmund Pettus Bridge, so I didn't put that in here. But let me read you about the church. I'm sorry, about Bloody Sunday. The protest march on Sunday, March 7, 1965 was deemed Bloody Sunday because of the 4 people who died at the hands of police that afternoon. The planned march protested the murder of Jimmy Lee Jackson, a voting rights activist who was shot and then beaten by state troopers in February, just the month before. Along with a dozen other injured people, Jackson went to the Good Samaritan Hospital in Selma, but died after 8 days. About 600 marchers organized for another voting protest a few days later. They organized at the Brown Chapel AME Church. Clergy from around the nation, from all faiths, joined the march in solidarity to protest the country's refusal to recognize the human dignity and civil rights of African Americans. Armed with batons and tear gas, state troopers stood menacingly at the far end of the bridge. Chaos erupted as the marchers stepped onto the highway. Although the marchers were peaceful, the police beat them, causing dozens of people to be hospitalized. Representative John Lewis, who was a 25-year-old activist at the time, was among the most severely beaten. And for the rest of his life, he coped with the effects of the concussion that day. So there were one Bloody Sunday march. There was a second effort. Finally, the third one, Martin Luther King led the several-day march into Montgomery. And by the end of the march, 25,000 people were entering the Capitol. So it was ultimately successful. So in my mind, so I want to talk a little bit about Selma because I was so profound. It was so profound there, encountering the people who live there now, some of whom had participated in Bloody Sunday. And so Selma, in my mind, was a city of courage. It was proud and defiant. And every year people come to celebrate that. But what I didn't know is that then the people leave to celebrate, who've come to celebrate the march. And in fact, Selma is a city of profound poverty and destruction. The only hospital in town closed years ago. So Selma is located in Lowndes County, Bloody Lowndes it was called, for the relentless violence of whites against African Americans. In 1960, at this time, there were 15,000 residents, 80% were African American, and 80% of those people lived below the poverty line, and not a single African American was registered to vote in the whole county. And now Selma, so I expected to see Selma thriving because it seemed heroic. In 2020, 43% of the population is under the poverty line. 50% of the employed people are also under the poverty line because the only wages are minimum wage. Only 2/3 of the students there graduate from high school. 70% of the children live in single parent homes. The unemployment rate at that time was 14%, while our nation's was at 3%. And 29% of the population suffer from food insecurity. So for me, this is a hard question. Why? Why have we as a nation allowed this? It's one of the many stories that we neither see nor lean into about our nation underfunding the structures that provide life and well-being for our Black citizens. And it struck me so strongly because the contrast between the heroism of the civil rights movement and then the abandoned citizens, the average citizens who lived and fought for the civil rights that we enjoy today. And let me then turn to this stone, the picture of the stone in the lower right-hand corner. This is a stone monument at the base of the Selma Bridge. And again, I found this spiritually and emotionally so profoundly moving and actually hopeful. So this particular monument had light gray stones and it captured my attention. A dozen angular boulders were set up behind a low wrought iron fence, a fence perimeter, sort of like family grave sites. Piled on top of each other, the group functioned as a memorial and a prayer cairn. These stones appeared sharp, as if recently hewn from a mountainside quarry, natural and arresting. The sizes varied from a towering 12-foot monolith to a field rock that a few strong laborers could have shifted by hand. Each stone presented a rugged ashen surface, water-streaked and pitted. I paused to consider the weighty inscription carved in capital letters on the large central stone, and I know you can't read it, so I'll read it for you. When your children shall ask you in times to come, saying, what mean these 12 stones? Then you shall tell them, this is how we made it over. Exactly as the monument designer anticipated, I paused. What did these stones mean? They meant, for me, for others, that the struggle in itself has meaning, and it's an invitation to encounter the struggle, but also to say, we shall overcome. We shall overcome, and this is how we will make it. So from that, let me just go back and forth and offer some practical advice. And many of you, of course, are aware of the principles of Catholic social teaching. These can apply for us if we're asking about converting our actions. They can apply to us for grand plans, but also small projects, and they can be steps to tend to the dignity of individuals, support families and communities, care for the poor and marginalized. These are things that we all know. And so I put these here as just a way to invite you to recollect them when we have our discussions very soon about what actions can be taken. So given that we're approaching civil rights, the celebration of Martin Luther King's journey and his legacy, I wanted to just put this up here and remind you of his I Have a Dream speech. And as he closes that speech, right, this is about, we witness his action and he and others, and we witness their invitation. And as he closes that, right, he says, one day, in the words of the Negro spiritual, we shall sing, free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. And we're still in that journey, on that pilgrimage to freedom. So I invite you to make sure you celebrate on Monday. But I also, here's one of the things that I do as witness. So in the lower left-hand corner, you'll see also the image of the flag, which is right behind me. And this is a flag quilt that I made, and it represents the civil rights movement. It was created by a parishioner of the flag itself was created by a parishioner of St. Columba's, and I interpreted it with fabric. The red clay of Georgia shows where the people were enslaved. The green for the fields of cotton, tobacco, or sugarcane were worked through stolen labor. The red line is the blood of the martyrs of the civil rights movement. The yellow pieces represent the stars and hope from the civil rights movement, the journey that we've made. And the deep blue sky symbolizes freedom and hope with the Big Dipper in the night sky. And I made this out of scraps of fabric because poor women only have scraps of fabric. And I made it with all different colors to represent our unity in diversity. And so this for me was a reflection, a way to encounter, a way to muse and grow in my understanding and incite me, right, to take action. So here's some other smaller steps about choosing justice, and I just offer them for you to take a look at. I'll read them only to move us along, but I know you could read them. I also want to say this phrase, if you want peace, work for justice. That's Pope Paul VI, incredibly powerful. If you want peace, work for justice. I'm sure you know that. And then Pope Francis writes in Fratelli Tutti, working for justice means confessing what has happened, recognizing the pain, acknowledging acts of violence and hatred. These should not lead to revenge, but to reconciliation and forgiveness, which cannot be demanded, but this is a personal act, a free and generous decision, one by one. Justice also means beginning with the least among us. So where do we have the power to make changes? To welcome, to assure and affirm, to practice fairness, to acknowledge the wounds, and to practice humility, generosity, and, as Jean reminded us, kindness. So here's the last part of the litany of conversion, and it's an invitation to action. Let our voices be raised. We shall call out violence in moments of disruption and also moments of calm. We shall rail against our planet's destruction. We shall hold lawmakers and gun manufacturers accountable. We shall preach against violent ideologies, particularly those driven by hate and racism. These are just some ways we can convert our action. You know more. But in every declaration, let us call relentlessly for a humane future that all people can share with joy. So let me close about the witness of our lives. So we've had the 3 moments of conversion, right? Converting our vision, converting our hearts, and converting our actions. And this is an image from the civil rights movement, and it's a tribute to Martin Luther King. And as you see the water coming rushing down the steps. This is a fountain, and each line is quoting Martin Luther King, actually his quote from Amos, the prophet Amos. And he says, it says there, but let judgment run down like waters and righteousness as a mighty stream. I couldn't help but take that it was a terrible rainy day when we were in, I think that was in Atlanta. So what I want to do is close with the prayer poem that I wrote to close this book, because I think it's an invocation to us as well. The day of racial justice in America remains a future promise. I know that day will arrive only when we bestow a great and generous love upon one another as one community in Christ. I try to imagine what a healed nation will look like when we live into the promised land that beckons us. On that day, the nation will live into its founding promise that all people are created equal. On that day, shackled limbs will be healed and shackled lives will be free. On that day, all the tears we have shed, all of them, will be wiped away. On that day, we shall live as neighbors together in the promised land of our loving God. On that day, we will live as gift to one another. And on that day, we will tell our children how we made it over. How long till that day? It depends upon our faithfulness to justice. We hasten that day not long now when we grab our walking sticks, cling to our prayers of contrition and hope, and carry each other's crosses. And we follow the signpost witnesses who show us the way. Shema, hear, and respond. So may our lives count in the struggle for justice and peace. Amen. So those.
And so
Recording in progress.
So if you would like, it is in there. It is also in the emails that I sent out announcing our presentation today. So in either location. And then also, if I might mention before we get into it, and this will lessen our announcements at the end, we are a self-supporting organization. So if you have not had the opportunity to donate, I encourage you please to donate. There's a simple link that I've included in the chat today. We meet five Saturdays per year, and we ask for an annual donation of $50. If you're just joining us for now, it could even be as simple as a $10 donation for today, but that really helps us considerably. So if you can handle that contribution, we would sincerely appreciate it. So that said, let me see where we are. So we will break into our small group discussions, and let me just mention a little bit about those. We will have discussion questions, which will be posted in the chat shortly. And let me read them to you also. They concern the three key points that Alison made this morning. The first being converting our vision, the second converting our hearts, and the third converting our actions. So she has specific questions. Can you recall regarding our vision? Can you recall a time when your own worldview or presumptions made you blind to what you were seeing right in front of you? And then she provides an example. And asks us to consider what might have happened in the exchange that we experienced. There was also, thank you. So we have our, you can read them yourself too. Converting our hearts, consider the communities you belong to, what makes you feel a part of these groups, so on. And then lastly, converting our actions. what actions does toward racial justice can you make in your situation? Why would such actions why should they be easy or hard? And who could you team up with so that you're not feeling alone in the situation? But before we do break into our groups, I ask that you consider the questions or something else that was very, very meaningful for you in the talk, maybe in addition to the question, and share them with the group. We'll be meeting, dividing into groups of approximately 3. And I ask you also to consider the words that Jean shared with us early on regarding the art of encounter and the challenges, the gifts of the art of encounter, of truly engaging, of listening, referring back to some of the key points also that Alison made of what involves encounter, so that you can include that in your insight. And then my last request is that for each small group that you choose a facilitator, select a facilitator, and then the role of that facilitator is to track time in part to make sure that everyone has a chance to share. And let's see, it's 10:50. So, each person should have at least 5 minutes to share, maybe even longer, right? Because we're going to be in the group for 20-25 minutes. So, it could even be as, 5 to 8 minutes each. Certainly introduce one another, introduce yourselves. And if you're new, especially, that's important. Welcome any newcomer. And I think that's about it. And then, so it's about 10:52, so 10:55. So around 11:20, I think, if I'm doing the math right, we will be called back. Does that sound about right? Yes. So around 11:20, Karen will call us back. And am I forgetting anything? If I am, please, someone speak up. Okay, I guess not. I guess we're good to go. So, all right. We'll see you back in around 25 minutes.
Oh, and we have Karen with us. We have Karen.
And to share if there's anything that really came up for you that was, exciting or challenging, new, or very personal that you'd like to share. And we have, I think we'll take 20 minutes for this time period. Let's see, how's our time? Well, I think we should stop around 11:40. So it's closer to 15 now. But yeah, and the process is this. If possible, use the raise hand function, which is down in the under reactions. Okay, if you click at the bottom of your screen under reactions, you'll see raise hand is an option. If you would do that, I think it would be the easiest. And then Allison, are you comfortable calling on individuals? Yeah, that would be super. And
Yes, thank you.
excellent, thank you. So I see Jane Claire, you've already raised your hand. Excellent. Go ahead.
May I
Jane?
go?
Sure.
Teacher? One thing that you said, Allison, really struck me, and I think probably most of us, looking at all the gray hair in our group here, this tremendous hope of the 60s. And I, honest to God, thought we were changing the world, or we were going to change the world in the 60s. And here I am now, 75. But I think, and I combine that with what Rembrandt Weekland once said. He was the Archbishop of our Archdiocese here after Vatican II. And I think he said something like it takes 100 years for a council to truly take effect.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of changes have been made, but it's almost painfully slow, because we wanted to switch from the ugliness and the painfulness and the suffering that we experience now. But at the same time, and I gave the example of, I think a number of you have probably done it, I actually preached in my Catholic parish for 20 years. And then the Archbishop said, that's the end of that. But I mean, when I was growing up as a little kid in Philadelphia, women weren't doing anything except cleaning the altar. So, I mean, there have been some changes. But what does that all mean? I don't know. But when you said tremendous hope, I thought, yeah, I felt it. and I still do. But, it's been changed a bit by age and experience. Thank you for listening.
The only thing I can add to that is that I think we underestimated the power of emotions and the power of culture. So we thought this is so rational, it should happen. And we misunderstood that even if this makes sense, it doesn't mean that so deeply embedded in us are values about who counts and who doesn't, and the power and the need to keep separated. And also the structural racism. So we thought we could just convert one heart at a time, but we actually need to convert our structures. And so the past 60 years have been the development of understanding sociology and social structures and cultural structures, which we didn't talk about in then. So there are changes, and the problem is shifting. We understand the depth of racism, and it's not as easy. So encounter is a start, but it's not the end. Trying to see if
Any other questions, or if you'd like to share something that came up in your discussion group. I see Susan.
Susan, yes.
You're muted.
Unmute yourself, dear.
There you go.
Question for Allison.
I'm sorry.
And
The thing that I will always remember is the window of Christ that was given that came from Wales, and what that looked at. It was very alive to me in the sense that Christ was the tree of life.
Lovely.
He's part of everything we do, and he's there. He's the immanent God in every relationship we have. As Steve Bell said, one of his presentations that I listened to, every relationship is a sacred relationship.
Yeah.
And I think that's very helpful in remembering and helping us to give us the strength that we need to move forward.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you. Yeah. Susan, I think you have your hand up.
I did. I'm wondering how your husband and you navigated teaching your children they're mixed race kids. In this particular culture, they're automatically then African American. In a different culture, they would not be considered that necessarily.
Mhm.
How did you talk to them about race? Where to
Um,
be, how to be safe and yet confident?
Yeah, I mean, some of it was also starting early about how people look different in the society. But one of the most striking questions when we're driving through the city of Cleveland, which is very impoverished and mostly African American, and one of my kids said, "Why do all the brown people live in such terrible places?" And you go, "Oh my gosh." And so we started to ask that, and they present differently. So a couple of our kids have, they're not as fair as I am, but relatively fair, and may have blue eyes. They don't look quite Caucasian, or from strictly European background, but people don't know. They might look a little bit Latina, and then, sort of range. And some children have darker skin. So my other daughter will get questions like, and come home as a second grader saying, the boy asked me, "Why is your skin so dark?" And it takes, doesn't take much intelligence to understand the implication, that dark is bad. So we did a lot of conversation, holding them, friends who we knew welcomed them. But sometimes we had to split up because my husband could empathize more than I could, right? Not that I couldn't empathize, but right, he had those experiences as a child. And while I didn't. So we sometimes, and even more recently, we'll have their spouses, somebody will call my husband and say, "Could you talk again? Your daughter's had this experience. Could you call her?" Because the husband, our daughter's married to a white man. And so he knows that his father-in-law is the one to talk and to help. Not that our son-in-law isn't sympathetic or empathetic, but it is really hard, and their hearts get broken, and our hearts got broken. Because you can't change what's going out in the world. But we chose often integrated communities, so that would help. Thank you. And thank you for your introduction, Susan. It was lovely. Thank you.
You're awesome.
I'm curious what else your conversations were about conversion, and which ones felt possible, or
It looks like Sadiqa has her hand up. Sadiqa?
Oh, good.
This is my experience, which I shared in the group. I have a spiritual community, a Sangha that's kind of international. And after George Floyd was murdered, one woman took it on herself to show us every week films about the African American experience. So we have seen more than 100 films about the African American experience, and it has changed us. And we've also talked with people and now are joining a group that takes small tasks on to help change the systems. But I had an experience that I was with a group of white people, and all of a sudden I realized that it was powerful. Were I African American in this group, I would not know what was behind these white faces. I would not know if somebody hated me, if somebody wanted me dead, if somebody felt good about me. And I thought, my God, to live with that uncertainty day after day. And I'm just amazed at the resiliency and the beauty and the strength and the goodness of the African American community that will even consider white people as friends because of what they've gone through at the hands of our race. So that was something I should.
Amen. Amen. Yeah. Thank you for that. Susan, I see your hand up again.
Muted. Thank you, Sidika, because I've often thought that myself. In our group, we discuss times that we have missed the boat, especially like for me, I would have I didn't understand, even in our mixed race family, I didn't understand how deep the barriers feel to African Americans. We had some employees, and when we had new employees, we would take them out to lunch and, you know, get to know, et cetera, et cetera. And two of the African American women mentioned in passing during the course of the conversation, they'd never been to Lawrence Hall of Science, which is where, of course, you can see a fabulous view of the Bay Area. And they seemed to have such a narrow parochial view. I said, why haven't you ever been up there? And I don't think I got a good answer to that, but I was thinking, man, you're just keeping yourself really narrow and really to yourselves. Why don't you spread out some? And it took me several years to realize that if I were African American and I weren't comfortable in a completely white world, I would never go up to the Lawrence Hall of Science. Somebody might call the cops on me. It took me so long to understand that. That I'm trying to look at other ways I should stretch myself. So
Yeah.
thank you for this.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
What I should have done is I should have said, get in my car, we're going up there right now, and let's take a look. They had never seen the entirety of the Bay Area.
Mhm. Right, because remember the map of Berkeley, right? It's too white. Yeah, and it's real. I remember one of my siblings asking me, "Oh, remember hearing about driving while black? Is that true?"
Oh, it's true.
Yes, it is true.
It's true. It is true.
But how many people, and he's had similar experiences worldly and traveled and knows lots of people of different cultures and backgrounds. And I was so surprised that that question emerged right. But thank you, Susan. Exactly. The experiences of people, how we present, people others interact with us and cast upon us. And it's risky. A lot of things are just so risky for people of color.
Jane Claire has her hand up.
Oh, good.
Alice.
Thank you. Thanks for helping me in this. Jane, please. Jane.
Yeah. Jane Claire likes to ask a lot of questions. Anyway, Monica in our group was sharing with us, which I'm sure a lot of you are aware of, the book Tattoos of the Heart by, I think it's Gregory Boyle, and how this, I think he's a Jesuit priest, got it. And he got both sides. There was one thing where he was, I guess, training the people he was working with to be plumbers. And he never thought that, ex-convicts might not be welcome into people's homes. So had to change gears there, So it didn't have much to do with color, but what people see or hear or know about other people. But he really walked the walk. And I don't know if he's still alive, but he certainly did show us. I think these kinds of stories help us, like your story. I remember one time I had my son when I was 36, and we're walking around the public library, and I've been kind of gray since I was 20. And some of my son's classmates say, "Oh, you're here with your grandmother." It's like, and he kept saying, "Shh, shh, shh." But it's okay. That's a reality. But we all live within the conceptions that we grew up with, and it takes time to move out of them. Some of them are funnier than others, but thanks to your sharing your experience and wisdom, it helps us to take on more of that. Thank you.
Could I put the word?
Yes, and then I see Joan has her hand up. So
Well,
Trudy,
I don't need to be.
Joan.
Could I quickly put the good word in for the YWCA? Already 30 or 40 years ago, I saw every year the program where they brought in all these African American kids or children of color, and to tell them, let's go and look at the university. That's where you can go in the future.
Yeah.
They already did it, maybe probably more than 40 years ago.
Yeah.
I thought that was very, they have many programs that help with the social justice, if you want to call it, and also overcoming anxiety of the institution, right? of the belonging or not belonging.
Yeah, absolutely. Joan, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I just,
Thanks, John.
being a blue dot person,
That's the way.
and encountering. Well, first, I'm just so grateful for the resources that are coming out now that teach us about racism and the experience of people of color. And I think, I'm always looking for answers. Well, what do I do? What do I do? How do I make my feet move? And, well, then I go, well, what am I really reacting to right now? Which is, just the pushback against, that wokeness, how angry, a certain framework of people are really angry about those woke people. And it's like, then I feel reactive. So I'm trying to find a way to not react and say, well, look, there's these great resources. I've got this great link, a lecture about redlining. Did you ever hear about that? Just to give those resources, and in a way, we see how long it takes us to be educated when we haven't had those experiences. And so, yeah, just a comment to say that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's a long process of both head and heart, right? Yeah.
I think we're winding down. Is there any one last compelling question and comment? Mary, I see Mary and Jean. So how about a minute or so for each of you?
Yeah, what I read it last year and it was published posthumously. Toni Morrison's book, Recitative. And it really, really is about two women. One is Black, one is white. However, you do not know which woman is which. And it brings so close to your heart about racial stereotyping. It's a very short, brief book, beautifully written. I highly recommend it.
Thank you. Jean, you're muted.
Mine is a very quick response from our small group. One of our members grew up in Gary, Indiana, and the river separated the black and the white. I grew up in San Bruno, which was redlined, and I didn't know that till I went to college. And another member grew up in California too. I think my point is to go back to look at our childhood and where we were raised and where our Catholicism and how that has informed our own race relations. That's it. Yeah.
Excellent.
And then Joan Rowe.
Yeah, I was just going to say that thank you so much for your talk. It really made me think of some work that I do professionally, but we take people who are in like a pre-contemplative stage, try to make them contemplative. And it's only then that you really start to see, and then so that you can move through the process, because so much of our lives without lectures like yours, we're thinking about this and we're thinking about that, but we're not really ready to accept and move on. And so I love the way that you kind of laid it out for us to go forward, even after today, to take this, what we've learned today, and see how we can apply it. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to
Thank you.
everyone.
And Alison, I'm just inquiring. I have not read your book. I intend to. Is it a book that also is where in which we can go deeper ourselves, or is it more a reflection of your own personal journey?
Well, it's designed, right? There are 4 chapters and there's 7 moments, and they're really designed so you could read one a day and reflect on them. And some are theological and some are historical. So trying to instruct as, and educate as well as invite reflection. I don't have like questions that go along with it, but I do say things like, what if I did this? Or I always speak in the first person, or I realized, or what if I had done X? So those questions could be internalized. And it could be, what I ask people is to read it sort of not like you read a novel, but to read it in a contemplative way, to think about it.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. So I'll put this out to the group. If you have interest, you might indicate in the chat. If anyone is interested in creating a small group, for instance, to read Alison's book as a little book group, we could do that and get, meet weekly or every couple of weeks, whatever duration someone thinks, but an opportunity for us to go a little deeper. I'll just leave that out there for everyone to consider.
That would be my hope, that this contributes to people's reflection in any way I can support that. And thank you so much for this opportunity to be with you.
Thank you. This has just been our pleasure this morning. I think we've just kind of touched the iceberg of the potential for us to go within, and the potential again for encountering and transformation. And then, as you said, it is truly the tip of the iceberg relative to society. But there's so many ways as someone reflected in our group, that this is truly, with a very, very small, encouraging hi, how are you? Seeing the person, recognizing them as just, somebody else on the journey, right? The journey of life. But that it's in very small ways that we encounter, and we recognize and we bring together. So
and let us be midwives of change.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in the present moment, absolutely. So again, thank you, Alison. I just think that this was just a treasure this morning, and so personal also, which I really also appreciated. Much wisdom and just practicality and beauty. Okay, so it's now time for announcements. I'll mention that we do have a Google group, and if I encourage everyone to join it, because that's the best way for us to communicate to each of you our events, whatever's going on. If there are resources like Joan mentioned, we might even use that as an output of this event. Also, if you have resources, you could enter those into the chat, or maybe we'll get one going within the group so that we can share resources. And if you are interested, I just highlight that you're not in the Google group and you'd like to be. And if you note that in the chat, that would be terrific. The second thing I want to mention is this is a repeat announcement. It has to do with the student dinners with those for the students at Cal. And I have received another request from Father Ryan. And I just would like to encourage everyone who is local. A little hard if you're out there in Minnesota, but if you want to fly in, we'll find a bed for you. But encourage you to participate in a student meal. I think it's as an output of this event specifically, I think it's really important for us to mix, to mingle, to talk, and to spread the word of what our group does, what we bring, and what we can provide as a community of women. And for the young people to be teachers to us and we to be teachers to them, whatever that exchange shows. Specifically, there are a few dates that are coming up immediately: the January 29th, February 5th, and March 5th. And it would be terrific if this could happen in advance of our next event, which is March 11th. So I've had 3 to 4 people show interest. We need a core group of at least 6 to 8, and I would really like someone else to lead it. I have a taco bar recipe. If you need recipes, it's not that complicated. You can do it. So please put your name in the chat for me, and see if we can't get a group together and support the efforts at Newman Hall. What's next? Susan, would you please, Susan Grant, would you make the announcement for our upcoming events? And yeah, good.
I have to unmute. As you probably know, we meet every other month on the second Saturday of the month. Almost always, except for one. So our next event is going to be on the second Saturday in March, which is March 11th. And we have Gina Hens Piazza, who is going to be talking about reclaiming the Psalms in the 21st century. And that will be wonderful. On May 20th, now that's the third Saturday of the month. May 20th is Mary Jo McConaughey, and she will be talking about her new book, which is on Catholic Christianity and nationalism. All of those are, or both of those are going to be wonderful. The reason we have the May event on the third Saturday is because it conflicts with graduation. And one year we didn't do that. We didn't separate them, and our speaker could barely get to Newman. There are bookmarks at Newman if you're going to be there that have our schedule on them.
And I'll also mention, for those of you who are out of town, if you would like us to mail you some bookmarks for yourself and to spread the word, I will do so. So just indicate in the chat again that you'd like some bookmarks and maybe about how many, and we'll send them off. Jean, would you talk about the St. Jerome Bible Commentary event?
I will. And Karen, I think you have a share for this, don't you? While Karen's doing that, let me just say that Mary Jo's book is already getting fabulous reviews. It's coming out March 7th. So Kirkus New York Times wants to do a review. Anyway, it's just going to be great. So, all right, you heard Jane Clare say, and when we were younger, probably the only place women had were cleaning the altar. This is a moment in time that I'd like you to save the date, Tuesday, March 7th at JST at 7 o'clock. Now, why is this important? Well, first of all, Jenna said to me, invite the women from Women in Conversation to this event. We do not want all men in the audience. Now, why is this important? This is the third Jerome biblical commentary on the Bible. The first one was done in 1968, had over 200,000 copies. It was done by European and North American white men, 1968. In 1990, there was a new version of the commentary published in 1990. The same editors, 3 white men, theologians from Europe and from North America. And I believe there are 2 women who contributed. One, our own beloved Sandra Schneiders, who has been with us. However, the third Jerome biblical commentary for the 21st century is edited by 2 women and 2 men. And one of them, actually both of them, had been at JST, at the Graduate Theological Union. Our own Jenna Hens Piazza, who's actually speaking in March, is one of the editors. What makes this so important is that commentators from around the world, there has been a very deliberate effort to have people throughout the world of various diverse communities, women and men, to contribute to their perspective on biblical literature. So I highly recommend that we show up, and it'll be great to see each other in person too. That is Tuesday night, March 7th, and notice that you have to RSVP. And I believe that this will be sent out in the Google group so you can scan to register also. So I'll see you there. I'm actually coming back early from Guatemala just to be there. So see you then. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I have one last request or announcement before we have the closing prayer. I got things a little out of order. I'm sorry about that, Therese. Yeah, so the last mention is that there is a Just Faith program. I guess it's an 8-week circuit program on faith and racial equity that is starting on the 21st, next Saturday from 9 to noon. And this is at Newman Hall in person only. So if you have interest in doing, being a part of this, it's called Faith and Racial Equity, Exploring Power and Privilege. So there's an opportunity to spend 8 weeks with a small group from Newman Hall. There are some books that are going to be read and discussed, and I think it's a program that Just Faith rolls out. So that information is on the calnewman.org website.
Okay.
Okay, so, and Therese, would you like to lead us in the closing prayer today?
Yes, I would ask us to place ourselves in a peaceful moment after all these wonderful encounters that we have had. God of all, bring blessings and our gratitude to Alison for sharing her personal experiences, her words of invitation to see racial injustice more clearly in our past and present culture, helping us to pray, to move our feet, and convert our hearts and actions to seek what is right. Let us remember Dr. Martin Luther King, John Lewis, and other civil rights persons as we connect, encounter as a community of compassion and go forward, acting for peace and working for justice. May our lives count in the struggle for justice and peace. Amen.